3 words flipped everything. She's coming too. I wasn't supposed to live through that operation. I wasn't supposed to hear what they'd done, but I did. And now they're about to find out why underestimating a woman with nothing left is a mistake they won't make twice. I'm glad you're here. Stick around until the end, and tell me what city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story has reached. This story is based on real events. Names and places have been changed to protect the identity of the person involved. It's the story of a mother who gave everything for her children and grandchildren, only to be used, discarded, and forgotten. But when she had nothing left to lose, she rose, and this time, she chose to live for herself. The chemical sting in the air hit first, then the steady beeping that confirmed I was still breathing. My eyelids felt welded shut, but I peeled them open to a blur of white ceiling tiles and buzzing fluorescent lights. She's coming too, a nurse chirped like it was some kind of personal victory. Rebecca's face came into focus, perfect makeup, not a smudge out of place, even though this had to be an emergency. Her smile looked warm enough to fool strangers, but I'd been her mother for 43 years. David stood behind her, eyes on what looked like a very shiny, very new watch. Amazing how emergencies always seemed to line up with his upgraded accessories. Mother, you're finally awake. Rebecca's voice had the same fake concern she used in high school plays. We were so worried. I tried to speak, but my throat felt like I'd swallowed sand and nails. The last thing I remembered clearly was dinner, at my place, pot roast. I think then that flash of pain in my skull that dropped me like dead weight. Don't push yourself, David said, stepping closer with the smooth ease of a man used to comforting wealthy, aging clients. Everything's been handled while you were healing. That phrase, everything's been handled, had never, in my experience, meant good news. What do you mean? I rasped. They traded one of those quiet couple glances that always mean more than words. Well, Rebecca said gently, like someone breaking bad news that's already decided. Considering your health and what the doctor said about stress, we sold the beach house. David finished. For a second, I thought the aneurysm had damaged my hearing. Excuse me, the Cape Cod house, David said, like there could be confusion over which multi-million-dollar oceanfront place we meant. It closed yesterday. That was my safe place. The one I'd picked to live out what time I had left, watching the tide and reading books I'd never gotten to during my career. That's not possible, I whispered. I never agreed to that. David pulled out a manila envelope like he was performing a trick. Actually, you did. Right here. He pointed to a signature that looked vaguely like mine if you were squinting through vodka. The doctor mentioned memory loss is totally normal after this kind of trauma, Rebecca added. Short-term memory loss, some confusion. I looked at the document, trying to line up what I was seeing with what I knew in my gut. I had no memory of signing anything, but I also had no memory of the last week, so maybe they had a point. You're probably a little foggy, David said with professional sympathy. That's why we stepped in. The money from the house will go toward your recovery, Rebecca explained. We found a great place in Illinois that specializes in stroke rehab. Illinois, 2,000 miles from the water I loved. From everything I knew, I don't understand, I said, slow and careful. Why Illinois? That's where we found the best care for a good price, David said. Your treatment's going to be costly. We want the money to stretch. Thought something started settling into place, not quite suspicion, more like realizing I was stuck in a play I hadn't been handed a script for. How long was I out? I asked. 6 days, Rebecca said. The surgery was intense. We didn't think you'd. She didn't finish, but I heard it. They didn't think I'd make it. And somehow, in that week, my life was hanging by a thread. They sold my house. Efficient timing, I said. David's smile twitched. We didn't want to drag you into paperwork while you were recovering. Families make hard calls sometimes. I closed my eyes, tried to think through the meds and haze. When I opened them again, they were both watching me with a kind of careful interest that might pass for concern if you didn't look too hard. I think I need to rest, I said. Of course, Rebecca said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. We'll let you sleep. They started gathering their things, but something on David's briefcase made my stomach turn cold. His initials were stamped in gold, but underneath was a logo, Thornfield and Associates Real Estate Law. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was a real estate lawyer. And it looked like he'd just closed a major deal while I was unconscious. The puzzle pieces weren't all there yet, but I could feel them locking into place. I was going to need every ounce of strategy I'd sharpened during 30 years in academic infighting to figure out what game was being played and whether I was the one playing or just the prize. Sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that signature, saw that briefcase. By the time daylight crept past the blinds, I knew one thing for certain. If someone was pulling strings in my life, I was going to learn the rules. A new nurse came in with my breakfast, a friendly woman named Eleanor Rodriguez RN. According to her badge, she had that straightforward, capable energy I'd always respected in both nurses and grad students. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilson. How are we feeling today?" "Like someone who found out her home was sold while she was out cold," I said, which could be seen as either an impressive feat of family efficiency or a serious red flag. Eleanor paused while adjusting my her polite smile shifting into something more real. "That does sound unusual. Home sales generally need the actual homeowner to be present. You'd think." She went back to checking my vitals, but I noticed her scanning my chart with a kind of focus that suggested she was reading more than just numbers. After 25 years in academia, I knew what a sharp mind looked like. "Mrs. Wilson," she said, lowering her voice, "in my experience, families making big financial moves on behalf of a relative who's out of commission usually loop in the medical team to make sure things align with care and recovery. Did that happen in this case?" "Not that I'm aware of." Eleanor finished up and came closer to my bed. "I've worked here 15 years. I've seen families make decisions that don't always have the patient's best interest in mind." The careful way she said it told me everything about how familiar she was with the mechanisms of family choices during medical emergencies. "What would you tell someone in that situation?" I asked. "I'd tell them to get copies of every document, know their legal rights, and talk to someone independent if anything feels off." She paused. "I'd also suggest looking through their medical file, get clear on what actually happened before surgery." After Eleanor left, I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together what led up to my collapse. The memories were cloudy, but details began rising like old photos in a dark room. David had been stopping by more often those last few weeks, always with some excuse, checking on me, dropping off groceries, making me coffee. At the time, I thought he was being thoughtful, odd, since he never really cared much for his mother-in-law's day-to-day. And I'd been feeling worse, headaches, dizzy spells, that odd sense of mental fog I blamed on age and winter. But now, the overlap with David's sudden concern seemed too neat to ignore. When Rebecca and David showed up later that day, I was ready. "I've been thinking about the house sale," I said straight out. "I want a clearer picture of the timeline." David slid into the chair beside my bed, the way you'd expect a man used to walk in confused clients through complicated deals, of course. "What would you like to know?" "When exactly did I supposedly sign the paperwork?" 3 days before the aneurysm, he answered smoothly. "You called me, said you were thinking about downsizing, asked me to draw up the documents, and I signed them where at my place. I brought them over, we went through everything together. You signed in front of me." The whole thing sounded professional, believable, and completely wrong. Not because I couldn't imagine selling the house. At 72, downsizing made sense. But everything in me, everything I'd honed from decades of catching student lies told me this story had been practiced. "You know what's odd?" I said. "You're a real estate attorney, but I've never once heard you mention that." A small flicker of tension hit David's face. "Didn't think it was relevant in family settings until your mother-in-law needed to sell her house in the middle of a health emergency." "Margaret," Rebecca cut in. David's expertise was a blessing. "Can you imagine handling all this without someone who knows the legal system?" I looked at her, really looked. Rebecca had always been striking, but something had changed. New jewelry, high-end clothes, a polished look that hinted at recent financial gain. "You're right," I said at last. It was lucky David was around to take care of things so smoothly. They eased up a bit, clearly mistaking my words for approval, instead of the doubt they really carried. Later, Eleanor came back with my evening meds. "How was your visit?" she asked. "Educational," I answered. "Tell me something, Eleanor, from what you've seen. How often do folks make big life decisions right before ending up with a serious health scare?" Eleanor looked like she was turning that over. "In my experience, Mrs. Wilson, when something in medicine seems like a coincidence, it's usually worth taking a second look." That night, lying there with the quiet buzz of hospital life around me, I made another choice. If David and Rebecca thought they could handle me with patient smiles and carefully worded concern, they were about to learn how badly they'd misjudged me. 30 years of academic infighting had taught me that the most dangerous players were always the ones who grinned while cutting your legs out from under you. It was time to remind them that retiring didn't mean I lost my edge. The next day brought Dr. Sarah Chen, a neurologist with a sharpness that reminded me of my top grad students. She read through my chart with the kind of focus that meant she didn't skip anything. "Mrs. Wilson, I'd like to go over your medications leading up to the aneurysm. Can you tell me what you are regularly taking? Blood pressure pills, I think a multivitamin, and some ibuprofen now and then for my joints." I stopped, thinking. Recently, David, my son-in-law, had been giving me some extra supplements, said they might help with the tiredness I'd been dealing with. Dr. Chen wrote it down with care. "Do you recall what those were?" He said it was a mix of vitamins and minerals. They were in blank capsules, which struck me as odd. But David said his doctor recommended a special blend from a compounding pharmacy. "And when did you begin taking them?" "About a month and a half ago." David was pretty adamant they'd help with energy and blood pressure. Dr. Chen stopped her pen mid-sentence. "According to your regular doctor's notes, your blood pressure's been steady for years. What made you think something more was needed?" That was a fair question. David said my numbers looked high when he checked them during his visits. He brought a monitor from home, said he just wanted to keep me healthy, and you were okay taking unmarked pills based on those readings. The way she said it, I felt almost foolish. David's a professional. I figured he'd talk to people who knew what they were doing. Dr. Chen shut my file and looked me straight in the eye. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm going to order more blood tests. I want to see if anything in your system might have contributed to what happened. You think those supplements caused the aneurysm? I think it's worth checking if they were really supplements." After she left, I went over every single moment with David from the last couple of months. His sudden concern over my health, bringing that monitor, insisting those blank capsules would help. The longer I thought about it, the clearer it got. I hadn't been feeling better since I started taking what he gave me. I'd been feeling worse. The exhaustion had deepened. I'd been more confused. The week before I collapsed, even basic tasks were hard to focus on. When Eleanor came in with my afternoon meds, I decided to try something. "Eleanor, what happens if someone takes too much blood pressure medicine for a long time?" "You get dangerously low blood pressure, confusion, dizziness, maybe heart trouble." She paused as she sorted through the pills. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious." Eleanor gave me a look like someone who's heard "just curious" in conversations that had nothing to do with curiosity. "Mrs. Wilson, if there's anything you're unsure about from before your hospital stay, Dr. Chin's ordered full toxicology screening. Will have answers in 2 days." That afternoon, someone I hadn't expected showed up. Catherine, my younger sister, appeared in the doorway, looking like she'd just stepped out of a courtroom in a designer suit, ready for battle. At 68, she still had the laser-sharp look that had made her one of Boston's most formidable corporate lawyers before she retired. "Margaret," she said, hugging me gently. "I came as soon as I found out. I didn't realize Rebecca had contacted you." "She didn't. I heard through other sources." The way she said it, I knew those sources weren't family, they were legal. "I hear you've had some pretty big changes lately. You could say that." Catherine pulled out a yellow notepad with the ease of someone who'd spent 40 years writing things down just in case they needed to be used in court later. "Tell me everything." I laid out the house sale, David's part in it as the attorney, the strange supplements, and the sinking feeling that the signature on the paperwork wasn't mine. Catherine didn't interrupt. Once just took notes like she was prepping for court or war. "Margaret," she said when I was done, "how long has it been since we talked about the arrangements made after Thomas passed?" "Thomas, my husband, Rebecca's father." "The arrangements." Something in my head clicked. "The trust," I said. "The irrevocable trust." Catherine nodded. "Set up 15 years ago, naming you as trustee. You have the right to live there for life, but no power to sell or transfer the property." The air shifted, tilted like the weight of that fact just landed. "They can't sell what they don't own." Her voice was steady. "The house has belonged to the Catherine Wilson Trust since 2009. Even if you wanted to sell it, you legally couldn't." I looked at my sister, feeling the chaos fall into place. It was maddening, but it also made sense. "So their sales invalid, fraudulent, worse," she said, her smile razor sharp. "David would have known from a basic title search that you don't own the house. That same look she'd once used to corner an opponent in court spread across her face. "It looks like your son-in-law didn't just bend the law, he broke it." Just then, Eleanor came in with my meds. One glance at Catherine's legal pad and my face, and she caught the shift. "Mrs. Wilson," she said quietly, "Dr. Chen asked me to let you know your toxicology results will be ready tomorrow morning. She wants to go over them with you herself." After she left, Catherine leaned in with the stillness of someone locking in on a target. "Margaret, I think it's time we ask David about his experience in real estate, like how he pulled off selling a home he had no right to touch. What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we give him a chance to explain himself before we call the police." Her smile didn't soften. "Unless, of course, he'd rather explain it to a grand jury." Dr. Chun showed up the next morning looking like she'd found exactly what she feared. She shut the door, pulled up a chair. "Mrs. Wilson, your toxicology results show abnormally high levels of blood pressure medication." "How high?" I asked. "High enough to need emergency care." Her tone didn't waver. "Given your age and medical history, the amount in your system could easily cause the heart episode you experienced." The calm that came over me wasn't peace, it was recognition. So David's supplements were actually my blood pressure meds in disguise. "That's my professional opinion," she said. "What you thought were vitamins were likely concentrated doses of your prescribed lisinopril, possibly mixed with other meds that lower blood pressure." Catherine straightened, her whole posture changing. "Doctor, could this have happened by accident?" Dr. Chun chose her words with precision. "The dosages we found would require consistent, purposeful dosing over multiple weeks. This wasn't a mix-up. It was attempted murder," I said. "I can't say that," Dr. Chen replied. "But I can say it wasn't natural and it wasn't accidental." When she left, Catherine and I sat there for a long time, saying nothing, letting it all settle. "We need to call the police," she said. "Not yet." My voice was calm, like I was back at the chalkboard, working through a hard problem. "We need more answers. David might have been poisoning me, but there was still one thing I couldn't figure out. Why sell the house? Why risk all of this?" "Maybe he didn't know about the trust," Catherine offered. I shook my head. "David's a real estate attorney. Title checks are basic. He knew. So what exactly had he planned?" Before I could respond, the door swung open, and in walked Rebecca, dressed to perfection, as always, wearing that familiar mix of concern and practiced daughterly warmth. But this time, a few things stood out, details I'd missed before. The designer bag, the jewelry that clearly didn't come from any chain store, the quiet indicators of someone who'd recently come into real money. "Mother, how are you feeling today?" "Much more clear-headed, thank you. Actually, Catherine and I have been talking through some really fascinating legal points about who owns what around here." Rebecca's smile faltered for just a second. "Oh, right. There seems to be some confusion about the house situation. Catherine was just explaining that the house actually isn't something I can legally sell." Rebecca's face drained of color like a pipe had burst. "What are you talking about?" Catherine spoke in that cool, clipped way people do when delivering bad news in a boardroom. "I mean, the house has been under an irrevocable trust for 15 years. Margaret has the right to live here as long as she wants, but I'm the sole trustee. Only I can authorize a sale or transfer." Rebecca dropped into the visitor's chair like she'd lost her footing. "That can't be. Dad never said anything about a trust." "He didn't know," I said quietly. "I set it up after I found out about the affair, to make sure he couldn't leave the house to his secretary in his will. But David told me, he showed me, the documents. The sale already happened." "The sale of what, exactly?" Catherine asked. "You can't sell something you don't own, Rebecca. Any buyer would find that out as soon as they went to close." Rebecca's hands started trembling. "David said everything was covered. He said the legal paperwork was solid." I watched her unravel, caught between anger and panic. "Rebecca, where exactly did David say that money went?" "Into escrow," she muttered. Waiting for the final paperwork, her voice trailed off as the truth hit. "What paperwork?" Catherine asked. "David said there were a few title issues that would take a bit to fix, but the buyer already wired over funds as a sign of good faith." Catherine and I locked eyes. The story was starting to take shape, and it was messier than just a botched sale. "Rebecca," I asked slowly, "have you personally seen any of that money?" Her face answered before she did. "How much of it have you used?" Catherine asked, cutting to the point. "It wasn't really spending," Rebecca said. David said we needed to move the money into some investments while the title stuff got sorted. What kind of investments? A boat, some jewelry. David said it was about spreading the money around. Her voice faded with every word. I settled back against the pillows, starting to see the whole picture. David had talked someone into wiring money for a house he couldn't legally sell. Used that money to buy assets under his and Rebecca's names, and convinced my daughter it was all above board. Bold, illegal, and shockingly dumb for a man who claimed to know property law. Rebecca, I said gently, I think it's time we had a very real talk with David about his so-called investment approach. She looked at me like she'd just realized she was in the ocean with predators. Mother, I think we're in serious trouble. Yes, sweetheart, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You are. But as I watched the shock settle in on her face, something quietly shifted. For once, Rebecca wasn't looking at me like some fragile obligation. She looked like maybe, just maybe, she saw someone who might still have a way out. That was something. David showed up later that night, with a bouquet and the kind of too bright energy that made my skin prickle. Rebecca must have filled him in on our talk, because the confidence he usually wore like a tailored suit had begun to fray. Margaret, you're looking great today, he said, fussing with the flowers like they needed arranging. Rebecca told me you had a couple questions about the house deal. A few. Yeah. I nodded toward the chair next to my bed. Catherine had been going over some real estate law details I actually found interesting. David glanced at her, clearly picking up on the threat, but unsure how big it really was. Real estate deals can get tricky. It's not surprising if something gets misunderstood. I'm not confused about the legal stuff, I told him. I'm confused about how you managed to sell a house I never legally owned. The flowers nearly toppled over when David froze mid-motion. I'm sorry. Catherine flipped open her briefcase with the kind of practiced drama only someone used to rattling opposing lawyers could pull off. The property's been locked in an irrevocable trust since 2009. Mrs. Wilson has no legal authority to sell, transfer, or put a lien on it. David's lawyer instincts took over, and his expression went flat. I'm sure there's been some kind of mix-up. My title search came back clean. Then maybe you could show us that title search, Catherine offered, all sweetness. Along with the sales contract, the closing paperwork, and the breakdown of where the money went. That's all confidential legal work product, David started. Not when it concerns my client's property, Catherine cut in, or when it might be proof of real estate fraud. The air in the room seemed to turn cold. David looked between us, clearly reworking whatever game plan he'd come in with. Margaret, he said, locking in on me like he was trying to sound sincere. I think there's been a serious mix-up. If there's a title issue, we'll take care of it. David, I said quietly, I think we need to talk about those supplements you recommended. He didn't move. My what? The vitamins you've been giving me. Dr. Chen found them interesting from a pharmaceutical angle. Rebecca, who'd been quiet in the corner, finally spoke. What about the vitamins? Turns out they weren't vitamins, I told her. They were high doses of blood pressure meds, enough to cause exactly the heart issue that landed me here. The silence hit hard. David had gone pale, and Rebecca stared at him like she was seeing something awful for the first time. That can't be, Rebecca said, her voice small. David, you said they were supplements. They were, he replied fast. Margaret must be confused about what she was taking. The tox report was crystal clear, Catherine said. Want me to read it out loud? David shot to his feet, his polished mask finally slipping. There's a major misunderstanding here, Margaret. You've been under a ton of stress, and with a brain injury, memory can get shaky. Are you saying I imagined taking the pills you gave me? I asked him, honestly curious. I'm saying traumatic brain injuries can mess with memory and perception enough to make people unreliable witnesses. Classic move. Make the victim seem unstable. But David wasn't up against just anyone. He was up against someone who'd spent 30 years hearing creative excuses from grad students. David, I said, using the same tone I once used for kids who hadn't done the reading. You're a real estate lawyer who tried to sell property you didn't legally own with forged papers while slowly poisoning the supposed seller so she couldn't interfere. That's not then you convinced my daughter to help you spend money stolen from a real buyer, probably telling her it was totally above board. Rebecca made a small noise, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Whether you thought you'd get away with it or you're just not as smart as your degree says, I'm still deciding. David's color shifted from ghost white to a strange, purplish hue. You can't prove any of this. Actually, Eleanor said from the doorway, we can. Everyone turned to find her standing there, holding what looked like a small recorder. Massachusetts only requires one-party consent for recordings, she said, and hospital policy demands documentation in elder abuse cases. David scanned the room, like he was trapped, looking for a way out. This is entrapment. This is evidence, Catherine corrected, of attempted murder, real estate fraud, elder abuse, and probably a few more felonies we haven't named yet. I want a lawyer, David said. Good call, I replied. You're going to need a damn good one. While Eleanor called hospital security and Catherine jotted down notes for criminal referrals, I turned to Rebecca, who looked at David like her entire life had just imploded. Rebecca, I said, soft but firm, I think you and I need a private talk about just how much you knew about David's business dealings. Her eyes met mine, full of tears, and for the first time in years, I saw someone familiar, not the adult who'd been micromanaging my life, but the frightened girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. Mom, she whispered, I think I made some terrible choices. Yeah, sweetheart, I said gently. I think you did. The next morning brought Detective Sarah Morgan, a sharp-eyed woman with a nonsense presence, the kind of person who's seen too many messy families to be surprised by much. Eleanor had brought in the police after our conversation with David, and the detective had spent the night going over what she called one of the more unusual elder abuse cases she'd seen. Mrs. Wilson, she said, settling into the visitor chair with her notepad, I need a clear timeline of what led up to your hospitalization. I walked her through David's sudden interest these past 2 months, the suspicious supplements, my worsening health, and the suspiciously timed house sale. She took her time, jotting everything down, and occasionally asking for dates or clarifications. And your daughter, she said eventually, glancing over at Rebecca, who looked like she'd aged a decade overnight. What was her part in all this? Rebecca looked at me, pleading silently, before she spoke. I thought David was just helping Mom with her money. He claimed she was getting mixed up with her meds and had asked him to take care of selling the house. Yet somehow you ended up with the money from that so-called sale, Detective Morgan pointed out. David told us it was best to invest the funds while the title mess got sorted out. He pitched it like typical money management. Watching my daughter struggle to defend her choices stirred something I hadn't felt in a long time, pure, raw protectiveness. Rebecca had been foolish and careless, but she'd been played by someone who knew exactly how to take advantage of people like her. Detective, I said, you need to understand that David does this for a living. He's an expert in these types of deals. He knew how to dress up criminal behavior in a way that sounded perfectly legal to someone without a law degree. Detective Morgan held my gaze. Are you saying your daughter didn't know any of it was illegal? I'm saying she believed a man she trusted just like I did. Once Detective Morgan left to arrest David, Rebecca and I were alone for the first time since this nightmare began. She sat by my bed, tears running down her cheeks. Mom, I'm sorry. I should have asked more questions about what David was doing. I should have looked out for you instead of what, Rebecca? Instead of being glad someone else was handling things so you wouldn't have to. She dabbed at her face with a tissue. I've been an awful daughter. I weighed her words. You've been distant, maybe selfish, but David's the one who tried to kill me. Still, I went along with everything. I spent the money. I believed him when he said you were confused and needed someone to step in. Rebecca, I said sharply, did you know he was poisoning me? No. Did you know the house sale was fake? No. I thought David showed me all the right papers. Then, you were a victim, too. A willing one, sure, and you profited, but you were still used. We sat there quietly, both trying to piece together what was left of our family. What do we do now? Rebecca asked. After a while, now you help the police take David down. You give back anything you can. You tell the truth what he said, when he said it. I looked at her, really looked, and saw something I hadn't seen before. Behind the polished look and defensive edge, she looked drained, not just tired, but like this wasn't the first time David had pushed her into something she knew was wrong. Then we tried to rebuild something real, something honest, not just easy. Her eyes welled up again. Do you think we can? After everything I've done? Rebecca, do you love me? The question seemed to throw her. Of course I do. Do you want me safe and okay? Yes? Then yeah, I think we can. It'll be slow. It'll be hard, but we can try. That afternoon, Catherine came back, this time with James Harrington, a defense lawyer who dealt with high-level fraud. James had that sharp academic brain I remembered from my best grad students, mixed with the cold precision of someone who enjoyed tearing apart predators. "Mrs. Wilson," he said after looking through everything, "you've given us more than enough to go after David for attempted murder, real estate fraud, elder abuse, probably even laundering. He's in serious trouble. And Rebecca?" James looked over at my daughter, who hadn't said a word the whole time. "That depends. How much she helps us, what she really knew, whether she's willing to make things right." "I want to cooperate," Rebecca said quickly. "I want to do whatever it takes." "Good," James nodded, "because we need it all, every receipt, every text, every piece of paper David ever waved in your face. This case is going to come down to proving a long pattern of manipulation and control." As James explained what was coming, something unexpected hit me. For the first time in years, Rebecca and I were on the same team. She wasn't the daughter meddling in my life, and I wasn't the mother being dismissed. We were two women, conned by the same man, working side by side to make sure he paid. It wasn't the happy ending I once pictured, but it was something. 3 weeks later, I sat in my living room staring out at the Atlantic, breathing in air that tasted like justice and peace. The house felt different now, not just mine in spirit, but legally, unquestionably mine. Catherine had undone David's fake sale, and the would-be buyers, once they learned the truth, were surprisingly gracious. Rebecca had moved back to her place, but came by every day, helping me heal both inside and out after what the news was. Calling the Thornfield real estate fraud. Awful title, but it fit. The prosecutor called, Rebecca said as she walked in with coffee and the morning papers. "David's attorney wants to talk plea deal." "What kind?" 15 years if he fully cooperates and pays everything back. Rebecca placed my coffee in front of me with the kind of focus that comes from finally noticing things she used to overlook. "James thinks we should think it over." I took a sip, real coffee. No pills stirred in, and watched seagulls trace circles over the shoreline. "What do you think?" "I think 15 years is a long sentence, just not long enough." There was something new in Rebecca's voice, sharp, unforgiving. "He tried to kill you, Mom. He played both of us. He scammed regular people who just wanted a beach house." The change in my daughter over the past month had been nothing short of drastic. The woman who used to avoid tough calls now asked hard questions, expected straight answers, and took the blame when it was hers. The restitution would make things whole. Rebecca kept going. The boat, the rings, every dollar that moved through our accounts. I already gave the lawyer a full list of everything I remember buying. "And how do you feel about giving it all up?" Rebecca seemed genuinely caught off guard. "Honestly, it's a relief. I always knew something didn't add up, even when I was pretending it did. Expensive stuff that comes from hurting people never feels like luxury. It feels like proof." Catherine showed up mid-morning with James and a pile of paperwork. She'd been staying nearby since I got out of the hospital, said it was to help with my recovery, but really, she'd been the steady hand I hadn't realized I needed. "The DA's office is ready to recommend the plea," James said as he spread out the documents on my coffee table. "David's testimony could help bring down other fraud operations across the state." "Other cases?" I asked. "Seems David's been running versions of this con for a while, tricking seniors out of their homes, getting their families involved, and using legal jargon to make everything look legit." Rebecca turned pale. "How many people?" "At least 6 confirmed. Elderly clients who signed over their property without understanding. Relatives who were misled into thinking they were signing necessary paperwork." I took it all in, equal parts vindicated and furious. David hadn't just hurt me. He'd built his life on preying on people who didn't see it coming. Did anyone else get hurt physically? 2 ended up in the hospital after problems with their meds. 1 passed away at first. It looked natural, but now they're looking into it again. The room went still as the weight of it hit us. David wasn't just a fraud. He was a predator who pushed until people broke. "I want him to take the deal," I said. "Mom," Rebecca started. 15 years isn't 15 years is more than any of those people ever thought they'd get in justice," I cut in. "And if he helps stop this from happening to someone else, it's worth it." James gave a small nod. "The deal also means he'll never practice law again, and his finances will be monitored for 10 years after prison." "What about civil suits?" Catherine asked. "Families are already suing. Whatever time David has left, He'll spend it fighting lawsuits and paying back what he stole. After the lawyers left, Rebecca and I sat on the deck, watching the sky bleed into the sea. We did this every night now, an hour of stillness where we talk through the recovery, physical and emotional. "Can I ask you something?" Rebecca said eventually. "Of course. When did you first know David was lying?" I gave the question real thought. I think I always sensed something was off. But I wanted to believe you and your husband actually cared about me. That lie was easier than admitting I was just in the way. "I did care," Rebecca said quietly. "I just didn't want to be the one responsible." David made it sound like he had a fix that worked for everyone. And now I know that when something sounds like a quick fix, it's usually a disaster in disguise. As the night settled over the ocean, I felt something shift. The family that betrayed me was gone. In its place stood something better, built on truth instead of comfort, chosen rather than handed down, earned rather than expected. "Rebecca," I said as we got up to head inside, "I want you to know I'm proud of how you've handled these last few weeks, even though I helped him take from you, especially because when you figured it out, you chose to fix it, not hide from it." My daughter gave a real smile for the first time in months. "I learned from the best, who my mom. You once told your ethics students that intelligence without integrity is just. I can't believe you remembered that." "I remember everything you taught me. I just didn't know how to use it when it really counted." As we walked back in, I realized something inside me had finally calmed. The threat was gone. The healing had started. And the house was finally mine. Some investments in justice come back in ways you don't expect. Half a year after David's arrest, I sat in court watching my ex-son-in-law accept a plea deal, worn down like a man who'd run out of tricks. He looked older than I remembered. The polished suits and cocky posture were gone, replaced by a prison jumpsuit and the slump of someone finally facing the cost of too many wrong decisions. "Mr. Thornfield," Judge Patricia Morrison said, scanning the papers, "you understand that by agreeing to this, you're admitting guilt to attempted murder, real estate fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy in multiple cases." "Yes, Your Honor," David answered, barely above a whisper. "And you're aware this means no parole for 12 years, and you'll be banned for life from practicing law." "Yes, Your Honor." Rebecca sat next to me, her hand resting gently on my arm. She'd said she needed to be here to watch this chapter close. I offered to come alone, but she insisted we'd both been victims and should see justice served together. The prosecutor laid out David's crimes like he was reading an instruction manual: the poisoning, the fake property deals, the way he played our family, the money stolen from people who never saw it coming. I didn't feel angry, just weirdly fascinated by how intricate his lies had been. "Your Honor," said David's attorney when it was his turn, "my client acknowledges the damage he's caused and is ready to fully cooperate with further investigations, as well as repay all victims in full." Judge Morrison looked down at David like she'd seen too many schemes to be impressed by another slick operation. "Mr. Thornfield, this court finds your actions especially cruel because you targeted older people who trusted you with their safety and future. You used that trust to rob them and in some cases, to threaten their lives." She paused, letting it land. "The court accepts your plea. You're sentenced to 15 years in state prison, eligible for parole in 12. As long as restitution is made and cooperation continues." As he was taken away, David turned back to glance at us. I saw something on his face that might have been guilt, but just as easily could have been regret for getting caught. Rebecca gave my arm a quick squeeze as we watched him disappear behind the courtroom doors. "How do you feel?" she asked as we stepped outside. Like a long, messy story finally found its last page. That night, we had our usual family dinner at my place. Catherine and Eleanor talked about the Europe trip they'd been planning since Eleanor retired from the hospital. James sat at the table with files from a new elder fraud case he'd decided to specialize after all we'd been through. "The restitution checks will start going out next week," James said. "The defrauded buyers will get their money back, with damages. The other victims' families are getting compensated too." "What about the properties David used as leverage?" Catherine asked. "All being sold off: the yacht, the beach house he bought with stolen cash, even his office equipment. Everything's going to reimburse the victims." I couldn't help thinking there was something poetic about it. David's empire of lies now paying to repair the harm he caused. His whole career, now just a refund. "There's more," Rebecca said, looking a little nervous. I've been offered a job with the State Attorney General's office, working elder protection cases. The table went quiet while we let that settle in. I'd be using what I've been through to help investigate similar crimes, she added, helping families spot the warning signs, working with prosecutors to build stronger cases against predators, like David. I looked at my daughter, this woman who'd clawed her way out of the wreckage with clarity and purpose. What do you think about the job? I asked. I think it's a way to take the worst thing that ever happened to me and use it to stop others from going through the same hell. Eleanor lifted her wine glass toward Rebecca to honor her decision to step into something better. We toasted to her next chapter, and for the first time in years, I felt something simple and real, pure pride in the woman my daughter was becoming. Later, as things wound down and folks started to leave, Rebecca and I stood out on the deck, watching moonlight flicker on the ocean. Mom, she said softly, I know I can't erase the past, the choices I made, the way I let David manipulate both of us. Rebecca, I said, cutting her off. You've spent 6 months showing that change is possible when someone owns up to what they've done. I'm more proud of who you're becoming than I ever was disappointed in who you were. Do you think I can really help people? You've got something most advocates don't, a front row seat to how convincing these scams can be, and how easy it is for good families to fall for them. She smiled, quiet but certain, like someone who'd finally made peace with the pain. Besides, I added, grinning, you learned from the best when it comes to spotting people who promise easy fixes to complicated messes. Who was that? You, watching. You start to question everything David said taught me to trust my own gut again. As we stepped inside, it hit me living well really is the best payback. David was starting a long prison stint, while Rebecca was launching a career focused on protecting vulnerable people. Some lessons come at a steep cost, but they're worth every cent. A year after David was sentenced, I found myself at the podium at the Boston Convention Center, facing a room full of social workers, police officers, and advocates gathered for the annual Elder Protection Symposium. At 73, I never imagined I'd be giving public talks, but surviving an attempted murder apparently qualifies you to speak on family financial abuse. 2 years ago, I was just a retired professor living quietly in my beach house, believing my family had my back. I had to learn the hard way that the ones who smile and offer help can be the ones stealing from you, and that the deadliest lies are wrapped in concern. I told them about the signs I ignored: David's sudden attention, the strange supplements, the urgent talk of taking over my finances for my own good. The room was dead quiet, pens moving fast. These people understood that this information could save someone's life. The core message I told them is that real care doesn't take your choices away. If someone insists on making decisions for you because they know best, they're not helping, you're being controlled. It all comes down to whether or not you still get to say no. During the Q&A, a woman in her 60s raised her hand. Mrs. Wilson, how do you learn to trust again after finding out your own family was willing to hurt you for money? I'd been asking myself that same question all year. You don't rebuild the same kind of trust, I said. You build something different, one based on behavior over time, not blood ties or old loyalties. Trust becomes something you earn, not something you inherit. After the talk, Rebecca and I had lunch. She'd driven in from her new job in Springfield, working on a task force tackling elder fraud in Western Massachusetts. She was built for this. She always had the brains, but now she was using them to protect, not manage. You were incredible up there, she said. As we settled into a booth in the corner, I was taking notes like I didn't already know the whole story. How's the task force? Hard but good. We've tracked 3 major fraud networks and just got warrants to raid some shady law offices. Her face lit up. She'd found her lane. There are so many people like David out there, using law degrees to steal under the radar. Any cases that remind you of ours? More than I wish. Older folks signing away property without knowing it. Family members going along with sketchy legal advice, thinking they're doing the right thing. Professionals abusing the trust that comes with a license. I looked at Rebecca, really looked. The defensive edge she'd carried for years was gone. Do you ever wish you'd done this kind of work sooner? Sometimes, but I don't think I'd be as good at it without going through what I did. Being manipulated by someone you love, it sharpens your instincts. That afternoon we drove back to my place, keeping up our weekend routine, tending the garden, finally talking about the things we'd ignored when our relationship was more obligation than choice. I have some news, Rebecca said as we planted bulbs that'd bloom next spring. I've been asked to testify at a state hearing about making penalties tougher for financial abuse by family. That's amazing. What are you recommending? Making it mandatory for professionals to report suspicious money moves involving elderly clients, tougher punishments when the abuser is a family member or caregiver, easier ways for victims to get their money back. I stopped planting for a second, struck by how much Rebecca had changed. A year ago, she was trying to control my life to avoid dealing with her own. Now she was out there protecting people from the same mess she once helped create. I'm proud of you, I said. For what? For choosing to be part of the solution instead of just saying sorry for being part of the problem. That night we had dinner on the deck, watching the sun dip low. Eleanor and Catherine joined us. Eleanor had moved in 6 months ago, officially for a change of pace, but really because I needed someone around more than I realized. Catherine came by every few weeks after moving back from Arizona. I have news, Eleanor said as we sat down with glasses of wine and Catherine's lasagna. Margaret and I have a project in the works. What kind? Rebecca asked. A book, I told her, that mixing my story with Eleanor's expertise in spotting abuse in medical spaces. A practical guide for families and caregivers. Surviving Family is the working title, Eleanor added. A hands-on manual to help people recognize the red flags before it's too late. Catherine raised her glass to turning pain into something useful. As we toasted, I realized that what started out as a survival story had grown into something more, something bigger than us. It had become a mission, a way to help others avoid learning these lessons through betrayal and fear. You know the best part, Rebecca said as the sky turned dark. David thought he was tearing this family apart, but what he really did was build us into something stronger than we ever were. I looked around the table at the women who had become my real family. Catherine, always steady with legal knowledge and a kind of sisterhood. Eleanor, who didn't just recognize abuse, she stepped in and stayed. Rebecca, who turned her guilt into a purpose. Some mistakes, I said, turn out to be the best thing that ever happened, just not for the person who made them. David was locked up in state prison, cut off from the family he tried to bleed dry. Meanwhile, we were building something he could never touch, a family held together by choice, by truth, by respect, and it felt better than anything I could have planned. 2 years after David's sentencing, a letter showed up over breakfast. The return address said MCI Norfolk, and I knew that handwriting, anywhere. I put it aside, didn't even open it. I had a garden to tend, a book to finish, and a daughter coming to visit for the weekend. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter like a silent threat, untouched but impossible to ignore. Are you ever going to open it? Eleanor asked while we were fixing dinner that night, still weighing whether anything David has to say is worth the energy it'd take to process. Curiosity's risky, I chuckled, remembering how it had carried me through years of research and, more recently, into the messier corners of the justice system. It's gotten me this far. Rebecca showed up the next morning, took one look, and clocked the letter. That from David. Looks like it. You've read it yet? Not so far. Still deciding if his take on recent events is something I need to hear. Rebecca thought about that while she set down grocery bags for our weekend meal prep. I think I'd read it, she said finally, not because I care what he thinks, but to get a read on his mental state, more like studying a subject than reconnecting with a person. That afternoon, we sat outside with Catherine and Eleanor, the envelope still there between us, a puzzle no one wanted to solve. You could read it, then filter the content, Catherine offered. Skip the guilt trips and just give us the facts. Or, Eleanor said, you could decide this isn't a conversation worth having, even if it's just one side. I picked it up and studied the writing on the front. The script looked shaky, unfamiliar, like prison hadn't just worn him down. It had changed the way he moved his hand across paper. I think I'll read it, I said. Not because I give a damn about how he feels, but because I want to know what he thinks a letter can do that everything else failed to. I opened it 2 pages, written carefully. Margaret, it started. I know you have no reason to read this, and even less reason to believe anything I say, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did to you and Rebecca. Prison has given me a lot of time to think about my choices and their consequences. I want to be clear that this is not an attempt to minimize my crimes or seek forgiveness I don't deserve. I tried to kill you for money. I manipulated Rebecca into helping me steal from you. I deceived innocent buyers and used my legal training to legitimize fraud. There are no excuses for these actions. What I want you to know is that the investigation into my activities has helped prosecute 17 other cases of elder fraud across 3 states. My cooperation has led to convictions that recovered over $2 million for victims' families. It doesn't undo the harm I caused, but it has prevented harm to others. I also want you to know that Rebecca visits occasionally. She doesn't come to forgive me or to maintain any kind of relationship. She comes to interview me about my methods and motivations for her work with the state task force. She's become remarkably skilled at getting information that helps protect other families. I'm proud of her, if I'm allowed to say that. She's turned her experience into expertise that matters. She's stronger and more purposeful than she ever was when she was married to me. I know this letter might seem self-serving, but I wanted you to understand that your survival and your decision to fight back has had consequences beyond just my imprisonment. The publicity around our case has led to legislative changes, improved training for healthcare providers, and enhanced protection for vulnerable seniors. You've become an advocate whose work saves lives. Rebecca has found a career that uses her experience to help others. Even my imprisonment has value if it prevents other families from experiencing what ours did. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve peace of mind. But I wanted you to know that the ripple effects of your courage continue to protect people I'll never meet. Respectfully, David. I read it through twice, handed it to Rebecca, who passed it to Catherine and Eleanor. We all sat there for a long stretch, not saying much, letting the weight of his words settle over us. Catherine spoke first. Didn't expect that. What were you expecting? Eleanor asked. Excuses, pity plays, anything but that. It was surprisingly measured. Rebecca glanced up from the page. He's right about the ripple effects. Our case is part of the state's training materials now. Hospitals and senior centers are using the book too, Eleanor added. I thought about what David had said, how the fallout of his actions had reached farther than just court dates and prison walls. Even awful people can sometimes make a good point. You going to write back? Rebecca asked. No, there's nothing left to say to him, and nothing he needs to hear from me, but I'm glad he wrote it. Why? Because it proves he gets it. Maybe not in a way that changes anything, but enough to show he's faced what he did. Later that night, as we were getting dinner ready, Rebecca brought something up that had clearly been bothering her. Mom, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest, always. Do you think the letter was real, or just more of his manipulation? I thought about it while slicing up vegetables for the salad. I think it was both. Manipulation's part of who he is, it's how he operates. But prisons made him look straight at what he did, and I don't think he can dodge it anymore. So you think he's actually sorry? I think he fully understands the damage he caused. Whether that's remorse or just recognition, that's not for me to say. Rebecca gave a half smile, like she'd gotten the answer she'd been hoping for. That's a very professor-like response. I'm a very professor-like person. It's the lens that's helped me separate emotion from reality, which is crucial when you're staring down something complicated. As we sat down to eat, it hit me David's letter didn't rip anything open. It didn't spark regret or confusion, that it just laid out what I already knew to be true, that making it through what he did to us had helped shield others from the same. Justice doesn't always add up cleanly, but when it does, it hits deep. 3 years after David got sentenced, I was parked outside MCI Norfolk, debating whether I'd made the right call agreeing to see him. Rebecca offered to come, but I turned her down. This wasn't about him. It was about me, about finishing something I needed closed. The visiting room was as bleak as the law would allow, all metal and dull light, the bare minimum of dignity. David sat across from me in prison gear, looking smaller, older. Whatever confidence he once wore had been stripped down to something raw, something more real. Margaret, he said as I sat, thank you for coming. I'm not here to make this easier for you, David. I've got questions. That's why I'm here. Of course, ask whatever you need. I studied him. What prison had done to him wasn't cosmetic. His charm, that polished mask he used to wear, was gone. What was left looked a lot like honesty. Help me understand how you talked yourself into thinking poisoning me made sense. He paused, choosing each word. I never saw it as that. I thought I was just making you sick enough to need help managing things. I didn't realize what I'd done until you almost died. And then, I panicked. Everything was coming undone. The deed paperwork, buyers asking questions, Rebecca picking up on things. I figured if you passed naturally, the problems would just go away. The way he laid out the plan, like it was some spreadsheet gone wrong, made my skin crawl. But I kept listening. What made you think you could pull this off? Ego. I'd done smaller versions for years. Old clients who didn't understand the fine print. Families who trusted me too much. How many? 14. Over 8 years. Mostly older homeowners. People looking for legal help with property transfers. I'd get them to sign over more than they meant to, then used that power to benefit me or people I worked with. I took that in like it was a case file, and no one noticed. Some did. I was careful, picked clients whose families were already under strain, bad communication, money tension. It's easier to make yourself seem necessary when people already feel lost. And Rebecca, how'd you rope her in? His face shifted, maybe regret. She was lonely, unsure of her place. I told her selling your house was smart financial planning. Dressed up my scam like some elite investment deal. She liked feeling like she understood it, like she belonged. She knew about the poisoning. No, I told her you were struggling with your meds, and I was helping you sort them out. She believed it. She wanted someone else to be managing things. I sat back, turning it over. She'd been foolish, self-centered, but not part of the murder attempt. Why are you telling me this now? Rebecca asked me too. She thinks knowing how I operated could help her assist other families who've gone through similar things. And you're helping her because it's the only useful thing I can do with what I know. I can't undo the damage, but I can try to keep it from happening again. We talked for another hour. He laid out details, his process, his motivations, everything Rebecca might need for her work with the task force. Near the end, one more question surfaced. Do you get why I'm not forgiving you? Yes. No hesitation. You don't forgive someone for trying to kill you. You survive them. You stop them. Then you get on with your life. Forgiveness is for mistakes, not for plotting the death of your family for a payout. I looked at him. This man who almost erased me. Something inside me settled, not peace, not forgiveness, but clarity. A full picture of what I'd endured. David, I said, standing up, I hope this place taught you something about what other people's lives are worth. It has too late for the ones I hurt. Maybe not too late to help someone else down the line. I walked out lighter than I'd felt in years. Not because I forgave him, I didn't. He didn't earn that. But because surviving him had led to protecting others. That night, I called Rebecca, told her what he'd shared. Every method, every victim. She listened like someone piecing together a broken system, taking notes with purpose. How did it feel seeing him? She asked when I finished. Like I finally read the last chapter in a book that's been haunting me for 3 years. I get it now, what happened, why it happened, and what we've managed to rebuild from it. And David, he's doing time and offering details that help catch others like him. That's enough justice for me. Do you think he's changed? I looked out at the ocean from my deck, letting the question settle. I think prisons made him face his actions in ways he never had to before. Whether that means he's truly changed doesn't matter as much as whether he's finally being useful to someone. Very practical. That's me. It's helped me keep the difference between justice and revenge clear. As I hung up, I realized something. That visit had given me more than answers. It showed me that the best kind of revenge wasn't anger or punishment. It was living, surviving, and building something stronger than the thing that tried to kill you. David would spend his years locked up. I'd spend mine making sure fewer families fell into traps like his. Some conversations only need to happen once. This was one of them. We're not sharing this to judge anyone, but to make you stop and think. How many mothers are silently suffering in their own homes? Now I'm curious about you, the one listening to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you lived through something like this? Tell me in the comments. In the meantime, I'll leave 2 more stories on the final screen favorites from the channel that are sure to surprise you. Thanks for staying with me until the end.